round, yet last time round Situ couldn't make a recommendation. This time round, with no change, they've said that they can now recommend a yes vote. But I think it is interesting, as an Aer Lingus worker, one of the spurious arguments that was used to justify the privatisation of Aer Lingus was that the EU wouldn't allow the government to invest in that company because it would distort the market. Now, obviously, you know, that was a very nice shield behind which the Fianna Fáil ministers and TDs could hide behind. It was clearly a nonsense, even in the context of the EU, because it was a profitable company, and even under EU rules you could invest in a profitable company. But you have to ask the question, why only profitable companies? What's wrong with a government investing in jobs, in a decent, viable economy? And of course, there's nothing wrong with that. That makes absolutely sound economic sense. But the real agenda that has been furthered by the EU has been a non-interference in the right to make profit and in the rights of the market. And I think, to me, it was brought home very much to bear with the European Commission standing over the ability of the Polish government to give a grant to Daly, to take quality jobs out of Limerick, to decimate that region, and to allow them pay workers in Eastern Europe on lesser wages. And not only was that allowed to go basically unremarked, but they were allowed to give a grant to line the pockets of Michael Daly in order. This EU treaty, the Lisbon Treaty, in our opinion, is really about the type of Europe that has been underway over the past period. In our opinion and our view, this treaty is about furthering the interests of corporate Europe, about military Europe, the armaments industry and the political elite. A process that's already underway, but Lisbon gives it added weight. And that, by its very nature, is diametrically opposed to the interests of ordinary people. I think you can't ignore the backdrop against which this debate is taking place, and clearly the yes side want to use that to their full advantage, with a lot of posters talking about the economy, talking about jobs and preying on the very real fears of people. But we have a responsibility to tease out and go behind the sloganeering and examine the context within which the debate is taking place. And you'd have to say it's very revealing, because it's taking place against a major economic crisis, not just in Ireland, but throughout Europe, with 20 million people now unemployed. Of course, it's particularly acute in Ireland, given the profiteering, the speculation and the bubble that existed in this country. But the crisis that exists, we would have to say, and evidence would support it, exist as a direct result of deregulation, privatisation and liberalisation, the very policies that Lisbon seeks to enshrine and put even more at the heart of Europe. And that, to us, is not a step forward. In actual fact, it's more of the same. And as somebody who's been and worked in a company that has become a privatised company, I can tell you there's not a whole lot to recommend privatisation in terms of workers' rights or pay or conditions. But while many people might feel, well, an airline, does it really matter if that's privatised? What's the worst that can happen? You get a dodgy sandwich or your baggage goes missing, it's not really the end of the world. Whereas who should have the right to profit from health and education would be a different thing. And a lot of people would say, no, that should be not commodified. And yet, the Lisbon Treaty provides for that possibility, very much so. And there really is no ambiguity in this, because it removes the absolute veto in relation to trade of health and education, and replaces it with a much more conditional one which in actual fact you couldn't come up with any circumstances of how it would ever exist. So in actual fact it removes the veto almost full stop. And why is this taking place? Well, it's quite obvious, because of sustained pressure that's going on behind the scenes for the opening up of a very lucrative market in trade, in health and education. The United States, in their submission to the World Trade Organization, said the US is of the view commercial opportunities exist along the spectrum of health, social care facilities, hospitals and so on and so forth. Of course, they were backed up by their friends in IBAC, who also said, yeah, rock on, lots of money to be made there, and the quote has been well utilised. Of course, the government that we have now would have no interest in using a veto to stop the privatisation of health and education. They're already happily doing that. That's not the issue. The issue is that the democratic check against a government that wouldn't want to do that, or against our ability to stop our government, is removed and takes a step back. And in that sense, it's a very, very serious threat. I'm panicking here because the time, I've already gone over 5 minutes, which I can't in actual fact believe. The other key aspect that I want to touch on is the issue of militarism, because I know Joe wants to concentrate on some points of workers' rights. I'd have to say that one of the greatest indictments of the current debate is the lack of emphasis that's been given to the whole strengthening of the military aspect of this treaty. Because unlike some of the rights issues, which are a bit woolly and non-specific, the military aspects actually are extremely specific. And you know, Ireland is supposed to be a neutral country. We all know that their neutrality is very much an Irish solution to an Irish problem. Oh yeah, we're neutral, but come on in, use Shannon for your rendition flights, or for getting our troops out to Iraq, no problem there. But at the same time, just because the Dáil will still have to take the decision on whether Irish troops participate or not in a foreign mission, does not mean that our neutrality is not being encroached by this treaty, because neutrality is about a hell of a lot more than that. The first point I would make in this regard is we can't ignore what's going on around us, and the enormous lobby that exists in the EU now in terms of the armaments industries, where the top economies of the EU are also the top military powers. The top 5 of them control 1/3 of all the world arms trade deals. They engage in contracts with Pakistan, with India, countries where the people are suffering massive poverty. They do deals with Saudi Arabia, a viciously undemocratic regime, in blatant contradiction to the stated aims of the EU to honour peace, respect human dignity and all the rest. A direct contradiction in that regard. And this treaty gives the European Defence Agency the legal status to act as the pimp of the European arms industry. There's no ifs or buts about that. And for the Irish government to say, well, look, that's all right because we can opt, we don't have to opt into that, so it's no real problem, is just not good enough, because we don't want any part of Europe or the EU engaging in that type of behaviour. And not just would they be doing it, but they will be doing it in our name if Lisbon is passed, because the treaty says you must increase your military capability, which, given that you don't have to increase your health, your education, social, no, but you must increase your military spending. It provides for permanent structured cooperation, in effect a military alliance operating within the EU. And let's say they go to give military advice and assistance, which was the official excuse given to why the Americans went into Vietnam. Yes, the EU would decide to go into that based on a unanimous decision, but once they're in there, they act in the name of the EU, and all EU states have to back them, including giving over your embassies and the like. So I think, you know, it's clear that we will be forfeiting, if this treaty is brought in, our right to a possibility of an independent foreign policy. And when you see the devastation and the war and waste that goes on around the globe, then I think that really that is a very, very strong argument for calling for a no vote. And I think for the churches who call for a yes vote, to ignore that is really quite simple, even by their own standards. My last point is that they're not the only ones. We've everybody calling for a yes vote. The Irish rugby players for a yes vote, the dancing at the crossroads, mermaids, everybody for a yes vote or whatever. But there's very little balanced debate, I'd have to say, in the media. It's not even given a 50-50 prominence in this stage. My last remark, I'll end where, if you like, where I started, which was in the airport. To me, as somebody who works in Dublin Airport, to see Michael O'Leary calling for a yes vote, and the reasons why he's calling for a yes vote is the very same reason why I think we should call for a no vote, because the types of jobs he's talking about is low paid, not even if you could get away with it, minimum wage, yellow pack, non-union labour, and facilitating the race to the bottom that's underway. And Lisbon, if anything, furthers that agenda.